In the early decades of the 20th century, America entered the age of aviation with immense pride. The Wright brothers had ushered in a new era with their first powered flight in 1903 at Kitty Hawk. From that moment, mastery of the skies became a symbol of technological progress and national strength. Yet for African Americans, the sky was anything but open. Deep-rooted racial prejudice in American society shut down their opportunities from the very start. In the eyes of the military and political establishment, black people cannot fly, a discriminatory notion that persisted for decades, disguised as scientific truth to justify exclusionary policies. One of the clearest reflections of this prejudice was the 1925 report by the U.S. Army War College, titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War. The document bluntly asserted that compared to whites, Negroes are of inferior intellect, lack mental stamina, and are unfit for technical or combat leadership roles. These cold words on paper became a formidable barrier, sealing off military aviation from thousands of young black men who dreamed of flying. At best, they could work as laborers, porters, or in logistics units, but the very idea of a black man sitting in the cockpit of a modern fighter plane was deemed impossible by America's military leadership. Yet history is often written by pioneers willing to defy prejudice. Before the U.S. ever accepted black men into its air forces, a few individuals sought to prove their abilities elsewhere. Among them was Eugene Bullard, an African-American born in Columbus, Georgia. Facing discrimination at home, he moved to France and joined its Air Force during World War I. Bullard flew dozens of missions, becoming the first black combat pilot in history. But when the war ended and he returned to the United States, the government refused to recognize his service, dismissing his achievements simply because his skin color did not match the heroic image that white America was willing to celebrate. Another trailblazer was Bessie Coleman, the world's first licensed black female pilot. Rejected by every American flight school, she traveled to France, trained, and graduated in 1921. Coleman became a symbol of determination and talent, proving that the sky made no distinctions of race or gender. Yet instead of being given a place in the military or commercial aviation, she was confined to air shows performing stunt flights because America was not ready to accept a black woman as a legitimate pilot. By the 1930s, black communities in the U.S. began establishing private aviation schools, the most notable being Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics. Here, young African Americans received basic flight training despite scarce resources and indifference from authorities. These civilian pilots honed their skills and sent a powerful message to society. Black people are fully capable of mastering the skies. Still, the path into the regular military Air Corps remained distant. Meanwhile, the world's skies were darkening with the rise of Nazi Germany and the looming threat of global war. America was compelled to expand its armed forces, creating a small opening that civil rights activists quickly seized. Leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, labor organizer A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie launched intense political campaigns, exposing the contradiction. How could America preach democracy and freedom abroad while denying equality to its own black citizens at home? Black newspapers such as the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Baltimore Afro-American hammered the issue on their front pages, transforming it into a national debate. The political stakes sharpened in 1940 as Franklin D. Roosevelt sought a third term. To win in the industrial North, he needed black voters whose voices were growing stronger. This pressure led Congress to pass Public Law 18 on April 3, 1939, requiring that at least one flight school in the civilian pilot training program accept black students. It was a reluctant concession framed within segregation, but it cracked the door open. A narrow wedge, but one that would lead to a new chapter in military aviation history. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson officially announced the creation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, America's first all-black flying unit. Yet, even at its inception, the Army labeled it an experiment, designed to test whether Negroes can be trained to fly combat aircraft. From the outset, the Tuskegee Airmen carried a double burden: to fight for America while proving the worth of their entire race. The training site was chosen in Tuskegee, Alabama, a deep South state where segregation and racial hostility were raw and open. This only heightened the challenge, as trainees had to face not only the demands of the cockpit, but also daily prejudice and scorn, even within the base. Despite this, a remarkable cadre of pilots was forged. Tuskegee's training program was far tougher than the standard. Cadets needed at least 300 flight hours, compared to 200 for white trainees, and the washout rate was 60%, significantly higher than the 40% at other schools. This grueling regimen produced an elite corps, which Colonel Noel Parrish, one of the rare fair-minded white commanders, later described as super select. At the forefront was Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a symbolic figure of resilience. The son of the first black general in U.S. Army history, Davis endured brutal isolation at West Point, where for 4 years his white classmates enforced a silent treatment, refusing to speak to him outside official duties. Though socially exiled, he persevered, graduating with high standing and becoming one of the very few black officers of his generation. As commander of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, Davis fully understood his role. He was not only leading a flying unit, but also carrying the hopes and pride of millions of African Americans on his shoulders. In the spring of 1943, after months of grueling training at Tuskegee, the 99th Pursuit Squadron finally received orders to deploy. Their destination was North Africa, where American and Allied forces were opening a front against German and Italian troops under the command of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. For many of these black soldiers, it was the first time they had ever set foot outside the United States. They carried with them excitement and pride, but also deep anxiety. They understood that every flight, every battle, would not only decide their personal fates, but also serve as a harsh test of the worth of their entire community. Upon arriving at bases in Casablanca and later Tunis, the Tuskegee pilots quickly realized that their challenges extended beyond the Luftwaffe. They also faced skepticism from within their own ranks. Many white officers openly regarded them as a social experiment rather than true comrades. Some white pilots even wagered that the 99th would not survive more than a few weeks of combat. This contempt only fueled the black airmen's determination to prove them wrong. On June 2, 1943, the 99th Pursuit Squadron flew its first combat mission over Pantelleria, a strategic island between Sicily and Tunisia. Their task was to bomb and strafe Italian anti-aircraft positions. Through skies thick with smoke and fire, the P-40 Warhawks, with their distinctive black-painted noses, dived upon their targets, roaring through intense flak. Though it was not yet a direct dogfight, this mission marked a turning point. The Tuskegee Airmen had officially entered the battlefield of World War II. Just 1 month later, on July 2, 1943, history was made. During a mission near Castelvetrano, Sicily, Lieutenant Charles B. Hall spotted a formation of Focke-Wulf FW-190s, among the most advanced fighters in the Luftwaffe. In a tense engagement, Hall calmly selected his target, fired, and watched as the FW-190 burst into flames and plunged into the sea. With that shot, Hall became the first African-American pilot in U.S. history to shoot down an enemy aircraft. The news quickly spread through the press, boosting squadron morale and delivering a sharp rebuttal to their detractors. No one could deny that the Tuskegee Airmen had struck down the Luftwaffe, yet their struggle for recognition was far from over. In their early months in Italy, the 99th was often relegated to missions many white pilots considered secondary: tactical bombing, ground attack, and close air support, rather than the glorious high-altitude dogfights. Some U.S. officers, including General William W. Momyer, even reported back to Washington that the 99th was ineffective and recommended the unit be disbanded. This was a perilous moment. One order from the War Department could have erased the Tuskegee Airmen before they had a chance to prove themselves. Fortunately, the War Department did not act rashly. At the request of General George C. Marshall, an investigative board was convened to evaluate the unit's performance. The final report concluded that the 99th had fulfilled its missions effectively, suffered no greater losses than comparable units, and above all displayed remarkable fighting spirit. Instead of being dissolved, the Tuskegee Airmen were allowed to continue and given a new opportunity. In 1944, their fortunes shifted dramatically. The Tuskegee pilots were reorganized into the 332nd Fighter Group, composed of 4 squadrons, the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd. This transformation elevated them from a small experiment to a large modernized combat force. Most importantly, when they transitioned to the P-51 Mustang, long-range escort fighters, they assumed the role for which history would remember them, the guardians of the bombers. Until then, America's strategic bombing campaign in Europe had suffered staggering losses. B-17s and B-24s were routinely mauled by Luftwaffe interceptors, with some missions losing 20–30% of their aircraft. Many white escort groups were criticized for abandoning bombers to chase personal glory and enemy kills. In this context, the 332nd Fighter Group distinguished itself with iron discipline. Under the strict command of Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., they followed one uncompromising order. Your mission is not to hunt the enemy for medals. It is to protect the bombers at all costs. This principle earned them their legendary title. The Red Tail Angels, the Tuskegee Airmen soon became beloved by bomber crews. When B-17 pilots saw P-51 Mustangs with their trademark red-painted tails approaching, they often exclaimed over the radio, "Red tails here! We're safe now!" That phrase was more than relief. It was recognition that the Tuskegee Airmen had shattered the shadow of prejudice. Their record was extraordinary. Across more than 15,000 sorties, they destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. Over 150 on the ground, sank a German destroyer with machine gun fire, and escorted thousands of bombers with a loss rate lower than average. One of their finest hours came on March 24, 1945, when the Red Tails engaged Hitler's secret weapon, the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. Against these advanced jets, the Tuskegee pilots shot down 3 in a single day, a feat that astonished the entire 15th Air Force. Their excellence not only impressed Allied command, but also transformed attitudes within the U.S. military. Reports, branding them as ineffective, were discredited. Instead, senior leaders such as Dwight D. Eisenhower and Hap Arnold acknowledged the Tuskegee Airmen as one of the best escort units in the Air Force. More importantly, their success delivered living proof against the racist myth of inherent inferiority. Still, even at the height of their fame, they endured daily discrimination. At their bases in Italy, they were segregated in housing, mess halls, and even denied access to the same swimming pools as white pilots. This stark contrast underscored the hypocrisy of American society. Men hailed as heroes in Europe were still second-class citizens at home. Many Tuskegee pilots carried both pride and bitterness in equal measure. By early 1945, as the strategic bombing campaign reached its climax, the Tuskegee Airmen were no longer an experiment but a cornerstone force. They not only helped cripple the Luftwaffe, but also played a psychological role, proving that Black Americans could fight, lead, and triumph on equal terms with anyone. When Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group ended its journey with a brilliant combat record. Yet above all, they had defeated an enemy as insidious as Hitler, the racial prejudice entrenched within their own military and society. Their mission did not end in the skies of Italy. It would continue back home in America, where the fight for civil rights was far from over. When the guns of World War II fell silent in May 1945 in Europe, the Tuskegee Airmen returned to the United States with the hope that their service and victories would be recognized as heroic. They had flown more than 15,000 sorties, protected thousands of bombers, earned a remarkable record with 112 enemy aircraft shot down in the air and hundreds more destroyed on the ground. Their name, Red Tail Angels, echoed across the skies of Europe. Yet when the wheels of their P-51 Mustangs touched American soil, a bitter truth emerged. Triumph in the skies did not translate into freedom on the ground. At U.S. air bases, segregation still reigned. The same pilots who had faced off against the Luftwaffe were now relegated to separate quarters, separate mess halls, and even separate bathrooms. Some recounted that in uniform, they were greeted as heroes by strangers one moment, but as soon as they entered a restaurant or a bus, they were ordered to sit in the back because of their skin color. The irony was brutal. They had shed blood to defend democracy in Europe, yet that very democracy was denied to them in America. One of the most striking episodes reflecting this contradiction was the Freeman Field Mutiny, April 1945. At Freeman Field, Indiana, Tuskegee officers were barred from entering the main officers' club, reserved exclusively for whites. When they protested and demanded equal rights, more than 100 were arrested for disobeying orders. Although no one was heavily punished, the event exposed blatant injustice and became one of the first collective acts of resistance by black officers in the U.S. military. Many historians see it as a critical precursor to the later civil rights movement. Despite the discrimination, the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements could not be erased. Black newspapers such as the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender celebrated their accomplishments, portraying them as living proof that America had to honor its promises of democracy. At the same time, many white officers who had witnessed the Red Tails in combat openly expressed admiration. Some B-17 bomber crews testified that they had never seen escort fighters more disciplined or loyal. Such testimonials gradually chipped away at skepticism within the military. After the war, many Tuskegee Airmen continued their military careers, none more notably than Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. In 1954, he was promoted to Brigadier General, becoming the first black general in the U.S. Air Force, following in the footsteps of his father, Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., in the Army. His military career was not only a personal triumph but also proof that perseverance and skill could break doors once sealed shut by prejudice. Yet the influence of the Tuskegee Airmen extended beyond the armed forces. Nationally, they became symbols for the black community's fight for civil rights. As the civil rights movement gained momentum after 1945, Tuskegee veterans frequently spoke at forums, underscoring the absurdity of segregation. If we could shoot down FW-190s or Me-262s, why couldn't we sit at the same table with our comrades? That argument resonated not only with black Americans, but also with many progressive whites, for it aligned with America's own logic. A nation that prided itself on democracy could not endure on a foundation of racial segregation. Social pressures converged with global realities. After World War II, the United States entered the Cold War against the Soviet Union. In this ideological struggle, Washington promoted itself as a beacon of freedom and democracy. Yet, images of black citizens facing discrimination within the military became a double-edged sword exploited by the Soviets in their propaganda against America. President Truman recognized that if the U.S. wished to preserve its international credibility, it had to address this contradiction. The turning point came on July 26, 1948, when Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially ending racial segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces. The order declared, "There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." This marked a historic milestone, making the U.S. military one of the first national institutions to embrace full racial integration. No one could deny that the contributions and successes of the Tuskegee Airmen played a decisive role in paving the way for this order. Without the Red Tails' shining record, racist claims of black inferiority might have persisted and blocked reform. Through sweat, blood, and sacrifice, they had proven that courage, skill, and leadership were not bound by color. The Tuskegee Airmen's legacy spread far beyond the military. Many veterans became teachers, engineers, doctors, and lawyers, inspiring a younger generation of African Americans to follow in their path. They also took part in educational programs, sharing their stories to encourage future leaders. In schools, the story of the Red Tail Angels is now taught as a testament to resilience and the power of belief. Over the decades following the war, the Tuskegee Airmen finally received the recognition they deserved. In 2007, they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest honors granted by the U.S. government. President George W. Bush in presenting the medal, declared, "These men helped rewrite American history, not just with their victories in battle, but with their courage in breaking the chains of prejudice." Today, airports, schools, and streets across the United States bear the name of the Tuskegee Airmen as a permanent reminder. Still, perhaps the greatest legacy they left behind is not measured in enemy planes destroyed or medals awarded. It is the enduring belief that justice can prevail, that even the thickest walls of prejudice can be shattered by perseverance and talent. The Tuskegee Airmen's story is not only a military chapter, but a social one, where flight paths over Europe helped open a broader sky of freedom for millions in America. Looking back, we see that the Red Tails fought on two fronts, one in Europe against the Luftwaffe, and one at home against racial segregation, and on both fronts they prevailed. Though the victory at home came later and was hard-won, it was a foundational triumph, paving the way for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, with leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. When World War II ended in 1945, the Tuskegee Airmen returned to an America filled with the joy of victory, yet still burdened by the weight of racial segregation. Despite having proven their skill in the skies over Europe, many black pilots did not receive the welcome they deserved. They continued to face daily discrimination, were denied rights, and saw career opportunities closed to them simply because of their skin color. Yet what they brought back was more than military triumph. It was a social and spiritual legacy of lasting influence. The Tuskegee Airmen's combat record spoke for itself. More than 15,000 sorties flown, 112 enemy aircraft shot down, hundreds of ground targets destroyed, and most importantly, remarkably low loss rates for bombers under Red Tail escort. Their tactical discipline, unity, and determination under hardship made them a model unit. White bomber crews who fought alongside them often referred to the Red Tails with respect and affection, calling them the Red Tail Angels. The greatest impact of the Tuskegee Airmen lay not on the battlefield, but in their social influence. At a time when the United States remained divided by Jim Crow laws, the fact that a group of black pilots could fight alongside and often outperform white units shattered one of the most enduring prejudices, that African Americans supposedly lacked the intelligence, skill, or discipline to serve in elite forces. Faced with this reality, the U.S. government could not look away. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially ending segregation in the armed forces. This milestone opened the door to broader advances in the civil rights movement. Through their sacrifice and service, the Tuskegee Airmen directly helped bring about this historic change. Beyond that, many Tuskegee veterans went on to continue their military careers or became influential figures in American society. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the steadfast commander of the Red Tails, rose through the ranks to become the first African-American four-star general in the U.S. Air Force, clear proof that the color barrier in the military had been broken. In the decades after the war, the Tuskegee Airmen received growing recognition. They were honored in history books, documentaries, and feature films recounting their struggle against prejudice. In 2007, they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest honors that can be bestowed upon a group, cementing their place as both military heroes and pioneers of social change.